Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you. Happy Wednesday. I hope everybody who's in the Bay Area is enjoying the weather. We're having a pretty good time of 80-degree weather, and as we've already discussed, it'll be nice when it goes back to its regular cool and breezy weather later this week. But good to see everybody. Thank you for joining me. Not a whole lot to discuss today. I sent out as a topic for discussion Senate Bill 939, a proposal by Scott Wiener to force commercial property owners who are dealing with tenants whose businesses have been affected to negotiate seriously with their tenants. It is kind of an overly heavy-handed approach, and I get the feeling, and Bert, I think you could probably step in with your knowledge of Scott's background as well, that perhaps this is an opening salvo in a negotiation where he knows he's going to lose a lot or perhaps all of what he's trying to get out of this bill, and he's just trying to think of everything in advance. But my sense is that he's trying to take a bazooka to try to deal with probably a select group of difficult people who may be reticent to negotiate. But I'll keep my eye out on that. In the meantime, I'm definitely getting the sense that we're getting a few more requests for forbearance from our residential tenants, holding steady with the 35 or so out of about 500 units, 455 units currently occupied. And some tenants are coming to us saying, I tried to get through it the first couple of months, and now I've exhausted my savings and other resources, and I'm at the end and I need some help now. And, we're just saying we appreciate your having done that, and we will stick with you and do what we can. I'll have some more information, not next week, but in 2 weeks, we'll have the preliminary numbers about what we've got in terms of forbearance numbers. I have pretty much all of our commercial tenants have asked for some sort of forbearance. We are looking at tenants whose lease expiration is somewhere between 3 or 5 years in the future or less. We're thinking restructuring the term to have more months at the end, and offering a deferment for the current time. And for tenants whose leases are longer, I've got several where my clients have negotiated leases that are good for the next 8 to 10 years. And they're not really that interested in deferring 3 or 4 or 5 months or 6 months, 8 years into the future. I don't think either side is terribly interested in that particular solution. And so we're working on somewhat more urgent forbearance and providing, up to a 1-for-1, 1 month forgiven for every month paid. And I'm finding that many of my commercial tenants, especially the ones who have successfully or they're expecting to successfully complete their paycheck protection loans, need to have rent off the books and a check written right away so that they can show that they spent at least the 25% of that paycheck protection loan that's allowed to be spent on other expenses other than the payroll. And so, I'm just working with my tenants in that circumstance. All of my commercial landlord clients have been extremely reasonable and very understanding, especially in circumstances where both sides feel that the relationship is of great value and that it should survive beyond this very, very unusual and unprecedented sort of a situation where everybody's got to stay home and business is really, really bad. So that's where we're at right now. It's leasing is definitely a concern. We are working on getting some more active leasing agents involved in our business to try to get places shown a little bit more often to see if we can negotiate for the right tenants. And we had another really, really Deadsville weekend last weekend, though we did have an apartment that was rented over the weekend up at the top of Nob Hill on Taylor Street. And we did very well with that one, and we're pleased with that. But for the most part, the units that we're seeing that are renting quickly and easily are the ones that are really unique, and they're excellent locations, and it's the cream of the crop. And it's easy to tell that a lot of the as I have frequently said to people in the past, our business and the leasing business in particular is based on a couple of different kinds of moves. It's based on primarily people who are moving because they are coming to the area and they have been relocated here and their jobs are bringing them here, which isn't happening right now. And also sort of the discretionary moves, people who want different roommates, they want to move in with their partner, their significant other, they want to live in a different neighborhood, they want a bigger place, that kind of thing, and they're having a family or whatever the case may be, they're moving within town and it's a choice, not necessarily something that they're forced into doing by relocating, and that's also not happening right now. And so we're seeing the inventory really is starting to stack up, and we're looking probably by the middle of next month, we're going to get a bunch of keys back by the end of this week, early next week, and we're going to have some units that turn over pretty quickly, and then we're going to end up with a lot of supply. And right now, my recommendation to a lot of my clients in this time is let's just hang on, let's be patient. The value of your unit hasn't necessarily the intrinsic value of the unit hasn't changed. The market may be changing, but I'm not sure that anything short of a fire sale is necessarily going to get it rented right away. And I don't really want to recommend that people go for a fire sale right now. Pricing online on Craigslist seems to be holding steady. Maybe people haven't really gotten wise to it yet. But I think the best approach right now is going to be to leave the pricing more or less the way it is and try to make good deals with the best tenants that we possibly can to offer an opportunity to make a good deal with a tenant that seems well qualified and can present good documentation and good financial backing when they come to look at the apartment. So we'll be working on making that happen in the future. I don't have a whole lot else to say. It's actually pretty quiet out there. Bert, you've got a question. Go ahead. Oh, I'm unmuting you.
Yeah.
There you are.
That's not your question, just an observation. The media is suggesting everybody's moving to Fort Bragg and Dunsmuir.
Right.
So we'll see how much that is. I'm not sure that's going to work. It may work temporarily.
Yeah.
I was on a Zoom last night with YIMBY Federation, and the guest for the meeting was of course Senator Wiener. He went through about half dozen or so bills that generally don't deal with us, but he'd never mentioned SB 939. So it could be he's waiting. He's done the initial opening. He's waiting to see what comes back. Is my guess, because that's the way he does.
Yeah.
So
that's possible. The article I sent out indicated that it had made it through its first hurdle and was proceeding, to the next steps of being reviewed in committees.
Yeah.
And
he's got an SB 50, a new version of SB 50. I'm getting ready to go out. SB 899 covers church conversions, churches, hospitals, that sort of thing. 902 rezones, upzones for 10 units. 1120 makes a state-wide duplex not subject to CEQA. And then a redo of the housing element, which will streamline. And it had it had a zone shelter that's kind of minor and technical. And that's about it.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I was shocked to see such a sweeping, sledgehammer of an approach to, interfering with private enterprise, and instead of providing, support and guidance, it was, the basic construct was the tenant delivers a request to negotiate to the landlord, and if they can't work anything out in 30 days, the tenant is automatically allowed to back out of their lease and released from any further obligations, which, is kind of insane. I mean, I know we're trying to avoid having massive lawsuits over, unpaid debts going back, but that's a kind of an outrageous level of, intrusion into these leases as I've said, and my wonderful clients, all of you and many others have done, we're valuing the many years of relationship and the long, the long-standing reliability that many of our, especially commercial tenants, have provided the owners, and doing our best to just get by. And so this too shall pass. It feels like it never will pass. I mean, here we are. It's May 27th, but it feels like it's May 945th, and it's been endless and difficult. Though as far as staying at home, I see more activity outside of the street, but I do get the feeling still that maybe people are adjusting to this, and now that your calendar is cleared, you have very little to look forward to, and you're just sort of waiting for everything to adjust. But the approach of immediately allowing all leases to be nullified is kind of a lot. Antonio?
Has anybody that has asked for forbearance early on now started paying rent again? Have you had anybody in the April or May timeframe now prepared to start paying again in full or more? Is there any improvement on that?
Yeah, we've had a few people who have indicated that they are now receiving unemployment benefits, and they're able to do it. I've had one tenant in Oakland, a couple where one lost a job and the other one was still employed, and they I think had forbearance in April and May, and then they said they need one more month in June, and they'll be able to get back on in July. And they're having half rent forbearance at that point. So people are once again, I think, and I've said this before on these calls, being very reasonable and appreciative, and so far both sides seem to be adjusting well to the reality of the situation. And we're taking the lumps as they come and trying to move forward. In the beginning, I was recommending to my clients not to make any big deals, and I still am not necessarily sure that it is beneficial to anybody to rush into a forbearance agreement that includes a big forbearance just yet, because I think that there will be I have some faith that there will be a reasonable amount of assistance available, and I think that now that we're getting through to the end of May, we've been doing this for almost 10 weeks now. The fact of the matter is, even if you work out some sort of a deal, 6 months of half rent or something with a commercial tenant, and something comes along and there's an opportunity to recover some of that, forgiven rent, I'm hopeful that any government program would say, okay, well, if you've already made a deal, we can make you whole on the part that you forgave, or half of what you forgave, or 30% of what you forgave, whatever it is. Hoping that that's the case. And the businesses that have been closed, and the tenants who have lost their jobs, they're not going to get those wages and that revenue back. And so I don't know how anybody's going to really recover. And we're seeing the effect in the economy in general. Thankfully, many of I would say the vast majority of my clients are well enough capitalized that they're not at risk of losing their buildings as a result of this. And furthermore, many have found that their banks are willing to cooperate and give them 3 to 6 months of adjustment in their mortgage, because really it's an agreement to pay money over time. So if you can't pay it now, you pay it later, and that's we're hoping that everything goes back to normal then. Josh, did you want to bring something into the conversation about sales? Are you having any more success or any observations about volume in the market?
No, not a whole lot to report today. I mean, on the rent front, I got a request from a tenant to reduce his rent by 30% for 3 months. And he is fully employed, but his parents lost their jobs. And so he's feeling like he needed to move back in with them for a while and help support them. So he's keeping the apartment, but needs a break to help pay for his parents. So it's the tentacles of this crisis kind of spread out, right? And it's just going to be that way for a long time. All these different kind of repercussions. Sales market, nothing new to report. I'm keeping an eye on. Today I was reading a lot on commercial mortgage-backed securities in terms of how they're performing, because I'm starting to get concerned about the normal apartment buyers who are looking for nice deals at 4.5 caps and need decent returns, go to the sidelines and start looking for people who are in trouble, distressed assets. And so, you're talking about people not being able to perform on their mortgages and then making a deal with their lender. Things I'm reading, I'm like, I'm not sure if all of these mortgages can be reworked. So I'm starting to pay more attention to the investment community and to see what they're doing. I know a couple of deals. I'm aware of a couple of deals that fell apart. Some big buyers, apartment owners who are in contract, pulled out of deals because their rental income was so off. 20% reduction in their rental income. They're like, hey, I need to keep my cash at home here. Now, when those tenants start paying again, do they say, okay, I'll go get that deal now for kind of the similar return that I was looking for? Or now they're really going to go after the distressed assets and people who are kind of in trouble. So I guess that the degree to which commercial borrowers can rework their loans with their lenders will dictate how much distressed assets are really out there. So I think next week I'm really interested. I have some numbers for April, but I think May is really going to tell me more. The hotel sector is something like 20% of lodging, commercial mortgage-backed securities, 20% of that debt is 30 days or more late. So, they're getting clobbered. I don't know, we're talking about billions of dollars. I don't know if all these loans can be reworked, but, multifamily's not seeing that. We're around 4.5% or so. So that's something I'm just going to track and pay attention to, because I think, as a seller, not great. As a buyer, certainly some nice opportunities probably coming around, but the people who are going to sit now and then come back in really looking to strike and find a big deal, those deals aren't currently available. They're not out there right now. You can't go get a 6 cap in San Francisco all of a sudden because someone's scared. But what happens in 2 months, 3 months? So anyway, that's something I'm just going to pay attention to. So it'll be interesting.
Well, actually, it's interesting you mentioned Airbnb. We talked about that last week when we were talking about the increase in inventory and how, we listed a house in Bernal that had, a good pricing, but the only other units that were, 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes were furnished that were being offered for 2 or 3 months at a time. And that's clearly, previously an Airbnb product. And I've been seeing articles online talking about how lots of people who were buying houses and other units in order to operate them as vacation rentals and then maybe have them, as a place they can stay when they go visit, some beach community or San Francisco or anywhere, have decided now that the place has been empty for a really long time, it's time to sell it. And so we may very well be seeing that a lot of markets that had demand that was buoyed by having, vacation properties being sold for the purpose of being listed on Airbnb, those units are going to be coming back to the market and trying to be sold as regular housing again. And it'll be interesting to see what the levels of supply turn out to be as a result of this, based on the fact that the tourism, sector is completely wiped out. So that'll be really interesting to see what happens nationwide and in smaller communities that are, more dependent on tourism.
Yeah. Good thing is travel is up this last weekend. So people were taking off and saying, get me the heck out of my house for a little while. So that was a good thing. So occupancy rates were actually up. I can relate to that. Although I'm still trapped with my babies. Yeah, so that's good. So you're seeing some kind of movement where people are getting out and staying in hotels and going to crazy lake parties at pools and in the Ozarks and things like that. But anyway,
well, I guess we're going to start seeing spikes in the infection rate around the country as a result of these things. I mean, it'll be a couple of weeks before they know whether all that traveling for Memorial Day had any negative effect. Antonio mentions Disneyland reopens July 11th. That sounds like a great way to infect a lot of people really quickly. I can get my daughter to wash her hands reliably, but I can't get her to stop touching things and putting her hands in her face. So, that's, I'd love to have a place full of children running around and infecting everybody.
Yeah, hopefully they're okay, but it could be a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, it may be though that what happens is it's not going to be right away, because the people who are in the pool doing all that sort of stuff, mostly young people, it's going to wait till it gets back to their grandparents and other people, sort of second level down, 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks. And that's when I think you'll start seeing the thing get really badly in the hospitals, because you can have it for a week before you go to the hospital. So we're not going to see it right away. We're going to see it probably 2 or 3 weeks down the road.
Yeah,
and time for Disneyland to reopen.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the story of those super spreaders that stopped me in my tracks. The guy who passed it to 80 folks. You're like, most people are passing it to 1, maybe 2 people, but then there's these super spreaders, and that's like scary.
Yeah, definitely. Well, okay. Any other topics for conversation? Any other thoughts or ideas that you want to discuss? You're always welcome to suggest things that we can dive into more next call on Friday. But right now we're all just trying to stay cool here in San Francisco and prepare for when I can go up on my roof deck and see the fog rolling back over Sutro Tower, and know that our San Francisco summer weather is going to return soon.
I got a quick question.
Oh, yeah.
Pelosi's been talking about this next bill that so far the Senate's not going with. She's talking about the Denmark process, where Denmark didn't go through the employer. They paid the salaries directly to everyone who had been working, to make sure that they didn't lose their income directly, universally, and it worked very well for Denmark. They came out very quickly. It would be my opinion, if that happened, probably would be a lot more incentive to pay your rent. But that's just a judgment call instead of keeping it.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume, based on the fact that the vast majority of tenants that we deal with on a regular basis under normal circumstances are reliable and they are willing to pay the rent, that if they received a direct subsidy that was enough to pay the rent, that would cover their wages as they would normally get them, they would go back to paying the rent just as well as they could. I hope that we come through this together, and that everybody, landlords and tenants, trust each other a little bit more as a result of this, or at least among the ones that we already know, that everybody is on good footing. One thing that I forgot to mention, I think, Bert, you mentioned people moving to places like Fort Bragg and Mendocino to do their work remotely. There was an article that was going around, I think Denise sent it to me, that said something about 2 out of 3 tech workers said they'd consider relocating out of the Bay Area permanently if their company allowed them to work remotely permanently, which seems like a number of companies are willing to do, which I thought was very interesting, except that I'm not sure that the majority of tech workers are primarily here just for work. It's not that they go to work and then they go home and they stay in their very expensive apartment for as many hours a day as they possibly can because their apartment is so expensive. They're here because they want to be here and their jobs happen to be here. But the rest of the stuff that they get to do, the bars and the nightlife and the sites and the wonderful weather that we have and all of that, is a reason why they stay. And so part of it feels like surveying people, you know, a random subset of tech workers right now, as they're talking about working remotely, about whether they would relocate out of the Bay Area to save on rent. Sounds a lot like, oh, I don't know, randomly surveying a bunch of gamblers who have spent a night losing all their money and asking them whether they're going to do it again tomorrow. Like, yeah, well, the next morning, they're probably not going to want to do it again, but they're probably going to be back in the casino. Now, I'm not saying tenants are anything like gamblers. I'm just saying that there's an awful lot of value in the Bay Area that we all know and love. And this is a time when we don't get to enjoy any of that stuff. There's no, you know, restaurants, and nightlife, and, you know, museums and sites to see and parks that are open and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, people may very well be thinking, I might think about leaving San Francisco if I could never do all these things, but, you know, eventually we will go back to doing these things. I'll be able to go around the corner and get a nice dinner at a restaurant. So anyway, that is.
I agree with that, JJ.
Yeah. That's where we're at with that one. I almost forgot to mention it. Anyway, well, thank you, everybody. If nobody has anything else, it was great seeing you. Thanks for joining me again, and I will look forward to seeing everybody on Friday. Denise will be on with us. We'll talk a little bit more about the mayor's supplemental orders and their effect on all of us, and whether the courts have reopened, and what we're looking at as potential approaches to collecting, you know, whatever portion of past due rent we can come up with, and moving forward into June. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see you Friday. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, JJ.